So today I'd like to welcome Liz Entin. She has some paranormal stories to share with us, but she also has some interesting information because she is a researcher into the afterlife, into paranormal psychology. I'm going to hand over to Liz and see what she has to share with us today. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really happy to be here.
Would you like to tell us some of your background? Because I'm really fascinated to hear about the information that you've gathered about parapsychology and about the afterlife.
Definitely. So, touch of background about me. I'm very skeptical. I'm very science-minded. I'm an atheist. I never thought there was anything like an afterlife or anything to hauntings, ghosts, any of that paranormal. I just thought it was complete nonsense. And sadly, in 2015, my dad passed away. And I took what I say is just a shot in the dark and decided to see if there was any scientific evidence of an afterlife or survival of consciousness in some way. And oh my God, I mean, this was not an overnight process, but the vast body of research, it is astronomical and it is solid and it is science-based and it is backed by data. I can start with cases of kids with past life memories. I will start with that because that is the very first thing I found, aside from reading some about time travel and Einstein's theory of time relativity, but that's more physics and that's not parapsychology. So I'll get into some of the parapsychology. So the very first researchers and research body I found were the late Dr. Ian Stevenson and then Dr. Jim Tucker, who took over his research. They are child psychiatrists and they study cases of kids with past life memories from a very database perspective. And they're also professors at the University of Virginia. And I found a whole department at the University of Virginia called the Division of Perceptual Studies. And that's where Dr. Jim Tucker does his research through. There's Dr. Bruce Grayson through there who studies people who've had near-death experiences, which is when people pass away and come back to life, are revived. You know, nothing, that's not the super paranormal part. They pass away usually in a hospital and are revived through modern medicine. And then they report just phenomenal stories that have this very beautiful component, like seeing deceased loved ones and going to other realms. But they also post what they refer to in the research as veridical NDEs, and people who will report these highly spiritual aspects also report veridical aspects at times, which means it can be verified. They will, having been completely unconscious, say they were floating above their bodies, and they verify what the doctors said, what the nurses said, which doctors and nurses were there. They sometimes say they floated to their home and heard the conversations going on in their home. So there is something going on. And in the cases of kids with past life memories, these kids will start talking about another life, and Dr. Jim Tucker will study that and at times match it to a person. And while, it doesn't happen that often, all you really need, I mean, it's happened like quite a few, multiple cases. I want to say something like, I forgot the amount, but about 1,000 have been what he calls solved. And really, if you just have like one, I guess one could be dismissed as some fluke, but even still, that's something to think about. That's, as William James, who researched a medium in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Leonora Piper, and he could not find the catch. And he said that all you need, and I'm not quoting this perfectly, it's a beautiful quote, so I'm just saying the point without like the poetic beauty William James brought to it. But basically, it's to disprove that all crows are black. You need one white crow. So here are these just what at first you think are anomalies, and you start delving in, and it's so far from an anomaly. And since, you want to hear a lot of personal experiences, first, when I started researching Dr. Tucker's research, it caused me to rethink a few things from my life that I would have never thought of related to past lives. But I remember when I was, I guess, like it was under 5 years old. And what's interesting is all of Dr. Tucker's cases, the kids all tend to have these strong memories and fear reactions to things that don't make sense in this lifetime, related often to how they passed in their previous life. And they tend to forget these stories or stop having the reactions around 5 years old. And I remember when I was really little, under 5, my parents had this heating pad, and it was like just this sort of like faded blue floral, kind of not the prettiest of materials, but who cares? And I would see that material and I would freak out and scream. I remember crying, asking them not to use it. And I didn't have the vocabulary that you start to get when you were older, but it was this visceral reaction of picturing like deathbeds and dying in a hospital and hospital gowns. And it had that look to it. And it just had that visceral feeling to it. And I'd never been in a hospital aside from when I was born. We hadn't had deaths in my family that I was present for. People had passed before I was born. So there was just no logical, linear reason that I would have this visceral reaction. And as I talk to friends who've studied this, it seems most of us have something like this. It's just in our culture, we don't even think to associate it that way. And a big thing that the children say in the books or in the cases that Dr. Tucker studies is when I was big. And they talk about their previous life. And then I have some friends, in fact, another friend who researches this, I remember once telling me that he and his sister started talking about when they were big. And he remembers feeling so confused because he had memories of being big. And he was like, wait, but you start small and get bigger. Why do I remember being big? And so it's just lots of little fragmented memories that most of us have that aren't strong enough for Dr. Jim Tucker to ever, or Dr. Jim Matlock is another researcher. It's not strong enough for them to come out and study them, but it seems to be this consistency. And I find that so fascinating. When you start studying this research, you start applying it to personal aspects as well as just, this is some powerful research. So that's, part of it with cases of kids with past life memories. But if interested, I could go into some mediumship research and some signs research. And
yeah,
okay.
I had a client within the last couple of years who had seen other energy healers. I don't like using the word healers, other energy clearers. Couldn't solve her problem. So she came to me and I said to her, look, I'm going to work with you until we find the cause of this issue. And it took me 2 months to pinpoint what the issue was. So I looked at doing all my usual energy clearing that I do for people through their physical body, organs, chakras, meridian lines, and energy field. And it would slightly improve her problem because she was getting mind-splitting headaches. I use this example quite a lot with people. And she said, look, it's better, but it's still there. And she said, some days are worse than others. And then one day I was sitting there thinking about her, looking at a photo of her, and I'm like, there's something I'm not pinpointing here. And I heard in my head, you need to go back further. So I needed to go back into her past lives to work out where the migraines were coming from. She had been what I saw in a past life. I think it was 3 past lives ago. She had been a warrior. She'd acquired a head injury. Is that when I pinpointed that, within 3 days, her headaches disappeared and she hasn't had one since.
That's amazing. That's so fascinating.
So I am such a believer in this with you.
And I mean, even in Dr. Tucker's strongest case, the James Leininger case, which is a very long, in-depth case. I recommend you read it. I'm not going to go into it much here, except that the little boy had terrors of dying in a plane crash, kept screaming, plane on fire, little man goes down. After lots of research, they found out and matched him to a previous personality who'd passed away as a World War II fighter pilot. And the people who'd been in his Air Force troop and his sister from his previous life were alive. Not all of them from the troop, but quite a few. And his sister was still living. They were elderly. And he went and met them and they shared memories and conversations. It's remarkable.
It's just so unbelievable that people can remember things that they've not experienced in this lifetime. So there has to be something in it. There has to be something in it. Now, you mentioned earlier that your dad passed away.
Yes.
Have you had any communications with him? Has he shown himself to you? How do you experience the paranormal?
So aside from medium readings, I had a few weird things from him too. I got some signs. I can share some of the signs. And I also saw him once very early on in my research. I'd started to read about that happening, but I was still so unsure what I thought about it and still so shocked by everything. I didn't get to do what I wanted to do, what I would probably do now. Like I saw him and I just jumped and I was like, what the, like, what? I was just so startled that I didn't get to calmly engage, which seems to be where you get the most reactions. And so then he just disappeared. And I wasn't scared. I was really happy, but I was just startled. And I so wish I'd been able to be like, hi, I have a question. Tell me something that I don't know that mom would know. That my mother would know so I could get some evidence. But now I got some amazing signs. And I'll tell my favorite one. It's in my book, but I'm going to tell it again. Here you go. And so I disguise it a little bit in my book. I disguise what his favorite color is because I still get medium readings. And if there's too much out there, I can't evidentially evaluate readings. So I call them green feathers. It's not so far off, but so green was his favorite color. And I'm walking along and I see a green feather very early in my research. And I'd been reading then quite a bit about how feathers can be a sign, which is called an apport, which means they show up from another dimension or somehow they show up. We can't really explain why. So I see a green feather. I'm like, that's not the most common thing. And I was like, that's a little weird. Okay, I'll consider it. So I take it home. I'm like, I'll put it to the side. I'm not going to really think much of it, but I'm not going to completely dismiss it. Fast forward about 2 years later, I'm further along in my research. At this point, I'm volunteering for an organization called the Forever Family Foundation. I still volunteer with them. They're wonderful for anyone in grief and anyone curious about all of this. They have a scientific advisory board with Dr. Jim Tucker is actually one of the people who is on that board. They have fascinating scientists and parapsychologists and researchers. And they use science-based testing to certify mediums. I can get into some fascinating experiences with mediums too, and a weird experience I myself had. But I'll finish this sign story. So one of the mediums who's wonderful, her name's Gina Simone. I had a reading with her fairly early on. And I say to her in the end, she's like, do you have any questions? And, for me, I used this to get evidence. So I said, so did my dad send me any signs? She said, well, I don't like to answer that question because then you get attached to this one sign and you don't look at all the others that might be signs. She's like, let's say you wanted me to say green feather. I was like, Gina, it's a green feather. She's like, what? And that is part one. Story is not even done. Then, so fast forward like the next year, and it's one of the Forever Family Foundation events. They do grief retreats and afterlife and mediumship conventions and conferences. And I'm at one of the grief retreats and Gina is one of our mediums. And I'm getting little videos of all the mediums. And I haven't had a chance to get to Gina. And Gina it's the end of the weekend. Gina left a little early and I just felt so bad. So I said to, sadly, my mentor at the time, who was one of the co-founders of Forever Family Foundation, has since passed away, but her name's Fran, and she was like a second mom to me and really, really hard. But she was still there at this point. This was, I believe, 2018. And I said to her, Fran, I feel so bad. I got all the mediums, but I didn't get Gina. She said, just email Gina. Can you do this online and get the same little video? So, fine. It's solved. I wouldn't normally think about it. For some reason, it starts obsessing in my head the way a song gets stuck in your head. So I'm taking the train home And on loop in my head is, I feel so bad I missed Gina. That was so amazing when she got the green feather. This is obsessively playing in my head the whole time. Even though I emailed Gina, she writes back, no problem, let's pick a date. You would think I'd forget about it. It's just playing the whole train ride home. When I get back to the city, New York, Manhattan, I go home to my parents' place because my mom was babysitting my animals, and I'm tired. I decide to sleep there. And then the next morning, I take my animals to go back to my own apartment. And the subway ride back to my own apartment, I'm obsessing even more. But like, you just cannot get something stuck out of your mind. But it had shortened to where it was like, instead of like, I feel so bad about Gina, that was so great. It was just, Gina got the green feathers. Gina got the green feathers. As I'm getting closer to my apartment, and I'm just hearing in my head, green feathers, green feathers. I'm walking up my stairs, green feathers. Go sit on my bed. I open my laptop. I'm like, I have to actually do work for my like real job or my other job. And it won't stop. It's like green feathers. I can't even focus. I look over, there's a pile of green feathers sitting in the middle of my floor. I was like, oh my God. And so I photographed them, emailed them to Fran. I said, this just happened. Do you see these? And she did. And then I was one short of my lucky number. And I sent a message to my dad just because like I have to keep getting more evidence. I'm like, well, wow, it'd be amazing if it was my lucky number. The next week I found one more. And then that's it. And I have a little pile. I'm going to send them in. I just found out about a university that studies apports, and I'm going to send some of them in. And I was just like, that was unbelievable, especially like the combination of hearing green feather in my head and then seeing them. I still get chills when I talk about it.
So do you think that was your dad talking to you?
I think that's a really strong probability. And that's really big coming from me because I very question everything. So most likely, I mean, it's some really, really weird thing, especially all the layers of science. I would say that's the thing I think is most likely of all the possibilities.
I can absolutely relate to that because as you were sharing your experience, I remembered a very similar experience. I got one feather. My mum was in hospital, so her house was locked up, and I would go over every couple of days just to do a walk around, just to check, turn the lights on and off of a night time, to make it look like someone's living there. My father passed away in the house. So I'm doing the walk around the house, and I come to the spot where he passed away. And there is a very large grey feather in the middle of the house that is totally locked up. I'm the only person with the key. No windows open, no sort of possibilities of feathers coming into the house, no birds present. You'd think if there was a grey bird in the house, it would be flapping around frantically because it wanted to get out. But no, there was this one very long, perfect grey feather in the spot where he passed away.
Oh my God.
And he used to wear grey. He used to wear grey all the time, very beige, very grey. And I'm like, thank you, Dad.
Oh, I love that. Did you feel like chills when you saw it? Were you just like, oh my God?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because Dad was very private about his spirituality and his religious beliefs and so forth. So he never really talked about anything. So for him to leave me a grey feather, I'm like, thank you. I know you believe in this stuff now.
Yes.
Amazing.
Oh,
do you have any other memorable paranormal experiences that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Sure, I have a few. I can give one about animals and another about mediumship if you're interested in both
that
of
would
those.
Be great.
I had my dog and cat who've sadly since passed, Peanut and Simba. And they were the same color and the same size, and they were just obsessed with each other. So everyone called them the twins. And if I saw like one of them out of the corner of my eye, if it was out the corner of my eye, or they were just running past, or they were cuddled under something, I couldn't tell right away which one was which because they were so similar looking, even if they were two different species. So, and again, as I said, obsessed with each other. And Simba passed about a year before Peanut. I think it was just so hard for the two to be apart, and I'm sitting on my bed working, and no big deal. I just see Peanut out of the corner of my eye run around the corner. And I just look up, but Peanut hadn't run around the corner. She was sitting on my bed. And if you remember, I said I could never tell the two of them apart. So I was like, oh my God. And I'd already started studying all this. This was after losing my dad. And then to add to it, Peanut sat up, kind of barked the way she would excitedly whenever she did see Simba, and darted around the corner, just her tail going a mile a minute in this exact same area I'd been looking. So that was
That's
pretty
fascinating.
yeah.
We are so similar. As you're sharing your experiences, I'm getting these little memories coming up of having had experiences with visiting friends and then leaving, and they walk me to the car. And as I'm talking to them, in my mind's eye behind them, quite often I'll see a cat or a dog. And this happened to one friend of mine. And I said to her, did you ever have a German Shepherd? Like really long, really, really thin, long tail, big head. The dog was following you. And she said, yes. And he died about 10 to 15 years ago, and he's still following her around, and only saw him for maybe 4 seconds, but it was so vivid. And I didn't even know she'd had a German Shepherd. She felt really comforted by the fact that the dog had shown itself to me so that I could say, he's still here with you. He's still following you around. He's still watching over you.
I got chills. I love that. That's so encouraging, especially as someone who sometimes questions this still. And I have a bunch of animals that I just miss so much. So when you hear those stories, it's really hard to dispute. How do you explain that? You can't,
Well, you
so.
can't. And it's the same when my dad used to play with, we had a little orange dog called Dilly. Loved the tennis ball. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Always chasing a ball in the house, outside the house. My dad would sit in a particular chair and throw the ball against the wall. Dilly would go and catch it or fetch it, take it back. They'd do the same process over and over again. And when Dad passed away, Dilly would go and get her green tennis ball and either bounce it off the wall where he used to throw it, or drop it, and then kind of look up as if to say, well, I can see you. Are you going to throw my ball? And my kids didn't know what to do with that, because they kind of not really, they kind of believe, but they don't want to believe. And I just left it the fact that Poppy was just visiting, and Dilly could see, because animals are sort of very psychically open.
I think animals really see other dimensions that we don't. I mean, we literally know that they hear frequencies and see frequencies that we can't, but they seem to see and hear things interdimensionally, see consciousness from the other side that most of us, I don't want to say none of us, but most of us don't most of the time. So
No, that's right. And people are frightened of it. They don't want to trust that gut instinct that tells them not to drive home that way, go that way, but they go the other way and have a car accident. And they never kind of think, well, I actually got told to go that way and I doubted it. I trust my intuition more than 100%. If I'm getting that strong feeling I need to go a particular time, or to go a particular direction, or not to see a particular person that day, I just go, right, you're telling me that there's something about that interaction or that experiences that is not necessary, or it's going to be negative, or it's going to be detrimental in some way. I honor that. And it's a shame that more people don't follow that intuitive sense that we all have.
it's true. It's true. I agree. It's like a superpower. If you can start teaching yourself to listen to it, it's like a hack. And it's also just so much more love, because you get to have more of your loved ones. I mean, they're always around you, it seems, but you get to communicate and engage with them and get the benefits that they're trying to share with you and their wisdom, and being like, hey, don't go down that road, or you know what, don't go on that date. That person's not so nice. Or maybe that's a better job interview. It's like all different degrees of ways that you can communicate with them from what I'm learning, from drastic things. Again, like don't get in the car to, hey, go to that like bakery instead because there might be like a job opportunity, or like a cute guy is going to be at the table next to you and maybe that's someone who will be the one, which I mean those are very important things too. I'm not going to say those are mild, but they're not as drastic as don't get in the car. So I mean once you can get those communications, I just think it's like life at the next level. I mean, I'm working on it. Don't ask me how to do it. I'm just trying and not that great at it yet, but that's what I'm learning. And I see it with my friends that are mediums. Trust and learning. And it's sort of like learning, for what I'm starting to understand, to feel that, like, what is that information, what it means, what's it saying? Which for some of us, it's easy. Some of us, like me, not so easy, but I'm working on it. I wonder if it is innate in all of us and we're told it's turned off when we're children because we're told it's not true. I don't know. That'd be a study I'd love to delve into more. So
Absolutely. I find that once you start trusting it, you get so much information. Like if I hadn't have shared with my friend about her German Shepherd, she might never have known that he was there. And by me mentioning that, did that lift her spirits or did that help her in some way by him showing himself? So, do you have
yeah.
any other paranormal experiences that you would like to share with us today?
Yeah, the last one I can share is based on mediumship. And now mediumship, there, from what I started to study about it, there's a whole history. If you go back to the 1800s, early 1900s, the Society for Cyclical Research, the SPR, and the ASPR, the American Society for Cyclical Research, and apparently they're branches all over the world, they have fascinating studies. But the most current studies are primarily being conducted by the Windbridge Institute, Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi, and they do up to quintuple blinded studies on mediums. And, I won't use our time to talk about all the studies because you can go to their website. The Forever Family Foundation, where I volunteer, certifies mediums, showing that they can get accurate information under really strict controls where they can't cold read you, meaning they can't read signals from looking at you. They don't have any of your information or any of the sitter's information where they can't Google them. And they have to get accurate and specific, because you can get accurate information. Did you lose a grandmother and she loved you and she used to bake cookies and like loved your grandfather? Like, okay, that's pretty general and it's probably true. Now, you want to get specific. Was her name this? She did this for work, and she went before your grandfather and he was really lonely and like she used to like buy him like green socks. I mean, that's now accurate and specific. So Forever Family, there's another researcher, Dr. Jeff Tarrant, scans the brains of mediums and shows like fascinating brainwave activity. But this is all stuff you can find online. So again, I won't go into all the science behind that. I'll talk about some of my personal experience. So along with getting just some remarkable medium readings. And when I get medium readings, I take precautions. I give a fake name. Sometimes I'll give my real first name because it's Liz, but then with a fake last name because Liz is a very common name. Liz, Elizabeth, I'll do variations of it with a different last name because Elizabeth's one of the most common names that is out there across cultural borders, everything. So I disguise everything, have a friend pay, all of the above. So I was getting phenomenal medium readings, not all of them. So some were terrible. So if you've had a terrible medium reading, don't give up. Don't lose hope. Now, that being said, I'd gotten some good ones, some terrible, and I had just started volunteering for the Forever Family Foundation, and they had an event, and it was my first one, and it was the first time I met their mediums, some who've become some of my really close friends today. It was the first time I met these mediums in person. It was the first time I met my mentors, the founders of Forever Family Foundation, who've been like second parents to me. Sadly, Fran Ginsburg, who passed, who was like a second mom to me, and then her husband, Bob Ginsburg. I mean, they've just been like rocks and parents and wonderful people. It was my first time meeting this group. And this was at there a weekend in 2016, and it was called the Afterlife and Mediumship Convention. And for the last night, the closing ceremony, people could attempt to give medium readings, and the mediums, there was a panel of like, I guess 10 of them or something, and they were going to give people advice and tips. And you could go on different tracks that weekend. There were like 3 different levels of developing your mediumship abilities, and then one track for I'm in grief and I lost somebody. Now, I don't have abilities. I had a loss. I was on the I lost somebody track, and I'd already just started volunteering, so they kind of knew who I was, and they knew I was super skeptical. And so at the closing dinner, joking around, Bob Ginsberg was like, Liz, go, why don't you get up and try to give readings? So I was like, haha. And then I was like, you know what? There's this author, really amazing parapsychologist. And if any of your listeners don't know him, look up Lloyd Arbach. That's Lloyd with 1 L. He does phenomenal parapsychology and parapsychological research. And I had just taken a class on developing your mediumship or developing your psychic abilities. And we also learned about cheating and cold reading, all of, not so you could go become a cold reader and cheat people, but so you could know how to avoid it and what was involved. And he actually also is a mentalist, because cold reading doesn't have to be unethical if you're being honest that it's stage magic. If you're going to a party and someone's like, I'm a psychic, and it's a fun party and they're giving you fun, like, general information, it's really unethical if they're claiming abilities and then tying it into grief or trying to upsell you $300 candles to clear your energy. I mean, those are just, I think it's important people hear about that, because that's just so wrong. So I was like, okay, I was like, why don't I get up and practice a cold reading? So I felt funny physically. Like I felt like all these waves moving around me and moving through me. And I was just like, oh, these are neurons of my brain. I've been feeling a little funny all weekend like that. And I just assumed, because I had been like in deep, deep grief, in bed a lot, really antisocial, and suddenly I was around all these people. I assumed it was neurons of my brain healing and physiologically starting to rebalance after such a horrible trauma and a long time in bed processing. So I didn't think much of it. And so I go up and I go to this one medium. And she was the only one I sort of knew at this point, this woman, Laura, and I'd read her books. So I was like, oh, I'll just like give her a reading off of her book and it'll be funny. So I started to try to give one, but like she also talks about personal stuff in her book and loss. And I was like, oof, I'm not going to make a joke of someone's loss. I was trying to think of really light, funny topics. Like I had a sandwich this kind in high school, whatever. That wasn't a specific thing. But, something fun. I would never do a joke around someone's loss unless it was like, I see a great, great grandparent, And so I just like, my mind went blank. It was like I kept trying to think of things to say. It was like my mind went completely blank. Don't know why I did this, but I walked over to this other medium, Joe Shiel, and I just started talking. It was like I started feeling all the waves congeal, and I feel all these like vibrating waves all go to my chest and start like congesting in my chest and exploding and exploding. I was like, okay, this is so weird. This is what I'm feeling. Did someone die of a heart attack? He's like, yes. Then I felt them all like move up to my head and start like congealing and exploding in one spot in my head. I was like, this is what I'm feeling. Is this a brain tumor? I was like, no, wait, with the exploding, it must be an aneurysm. And he's like, yes. And then I just like, things would just pop into my mind. I was like, does Christmas mean something, but something really important to your family and different than regular Christmas? He was like, yes. And just, I like said certain initials. I was like, where's this like your grandmother's initials? He's like, no, those are my kids' initials. Those are my kids' initials, though. His kids are still living. It was just so weird, because not only was it accurate, but it was like I had all these sensations that was backing up why this was coming into my mind. And I never quite felt like this. And I felt all these waves. And then a few years later, Laura was like, oh, by the way, you got stuff that was not in my book. I was like, no, I didn't. Well, she said it that night. I thought she was like joking around with me. I was like, shut up, like, stop. But like, even just this year, she's like, Liz, no, you got information. I'm like, this is so weird. Like, even when she said that, or when I remember that with Joe Shiel, I'm like, it's so cool, but it's so weird. I'm like, how? Like, it's just like, it can't I can't wrap my mind around that I did that. And then I did it another time in a mediumship class. And it's just remarkable. And it's like all these sensations accompany it. And I've been able to do it a couple times, and not to the point where I could do this professionally, not to the point where I could ethically work with grieving people, but it's just fascinating. And I think it shows if I can do it, anyone can communicate to an extent, which shows how tangible survival consciousness is. If anyone listening is grieving, just like, I can't even tell you how shocked I was. And it just, I don't know, it sort of changed my whole approach. It made me, like, I went from like one level to another in terms of my ability to research, in terms of my thinking there was something real going on, which helped my grief and helped me be able to communicate this more to other people. So that was my paranormal personal experience mediumship story, which it was crazy.
Yeah, but you trusting it. You were absolutely trusting what was coming through and you were sharing it. People experience their psychic abilities in different ways. Some see, some hear, some feel, some know, some smell, some taste things. I'm primarily a feeler. So I feel the energy of people, of places. I was going to ask you about psychometry, which is holding items and picking up energy. So just like a random ring that someone gives you and you're like, whoa, this person looked like this, they felt like this, oh, they may have died that way, or they were married to this person, or this was their favorite ring that they got on their 25th wedding anniversary. Some people feel the energy within things. I worked on a table. You're going to love this. Because I do a lot of energy clearing remotely. I had a friend go, my husband's father has passed away and he's left us a hue and pine table. Now, hue and pine is quite prized as a long-growing wood. It has this beautiful smell and it's very highly prized in Tasmania, Australia, probably worldwide. Anyway, she was like, I'm looking at this table and it was in a bit of a dishevelled sort of state. It had been in a shed for a long time and it had just been left. So she sends me a photo of this table and she's like, I like this table, but there's something not right about it. It feels odd. It feels uncomfortable. I don't know what it is. When I looked at the photo, because I pick up energy from holding items or looking at photos, I won't go through everything that was attached to it, but there were a lot of negative emotional imprints, there was a lot of energetic emotional imprints attached to the table of distress and sadness and grief. But what got me was the visuals, again, like seeing the dog behind my friend. I saw a very angry, middle-aged or slightly older, 50-plus aged man banging his hand on the table and the wood vibrating. And it was the weirdest thing, but I thought, what has that got to do with the table? But I trusted it and I sat with it. And when I conveyed the information, which I won't share because it was a little bit graphic, when I conveyed this information to the lady about what I found, what I've cleared from the table, this other information came through. Did this man pass away of a heart attack or some sort of heart issue? I said, because his face was so red. Like I couldn't describe his face, whether he had blue eyes or brown hair, but I saw this really red, angry face as he was banging his hand on this table. All this information came from a phone photo of a table sitting in a garage. And I only know this lady as a client. I've met her once in person. I don't know her as a friend. She hasn't shared family history, but she said, yeah, this man died of a heart attack. And I said, I can see why from all the energetic imprints that were left in the table, but also through that visual of him banging his hand on the table. I can still see it in my mind now. So if we're all open to being aware of what we're shown, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, we would get so much more information in this reality that could help us and help other people.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And that table story is amazing. It's so remarkable. It's like what I always come to is stories like that, and the ones I shared and the ones so many of your guests have shared. It's like, where is this information stored? And I think once we answer that, we will have such a key to the universe. It's obviously stored somewhere, and it's stored in some conscious, alive way, and it is able to communicate and interact with us in some way we don't yet understand. As I mentioned, Lloyd Auerbach, he talks about hauntings versus apparitions. And in one of them, and I'm gonna mix it up, like I have the quote so known, I have like the notes in it, but I'm gonna mix it up. So I'm not gonna say which is which because I'll have it wrong. But in one of them, like haunting versus apparition, one of them is like what we think of as ghosts, like a consciousness that passed away of someone and we can interact with it. And the other is like a recording. So it's like the difference between like us on Zoom now versus if I was watching a recording of an interview on Zoom. And both information stored both ways, and one it can interact, and one when it's just a recording and there's no consciousness, it's like it'll be like those are the reports you hear of where one, like you'll see people report like a spirit walking along the same path every night at the same time for like 5 seconds or however long, 15. And it seems like that's actually like a recording of who this person was, and it's not their consciousness. So, I mean, we don't know enough about that to really know, but it's fascinating. It just shows like recording of information and energy in some ways we don't understand, and it can be in objects. I mean, it's
Yeah.
I don't know. We're going to learn so much more over the next however many years.
There is a lot to learn. Would you
It's
like to share
really
with us
fascinating.
about your book and your podcast?
Certainly. So I have a book on kind of how, from when my dad first got sick to, how I began to investigate if there was scientific evidence of an afterlife. And it's called WTF Just Happened: A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. And I'm in the process of finishing up book number 2, which kind of picks up where book number 1 left off, because book number 1 ends in about 2018. And then my podcast, I interview a lot of the people who've had fascinating experiences, who've changed my mind, like the researchers, psychic mediums. And that is called WTF Just Happened: All About the Afterlife, No Woo. And it's on all podcast apps, and you can find all of this. And I also host intimate science and spirituality dinners, or they can be breakfast, brunches, like events, I should say, intimate events of up to about 10 people. We can talk about the flexibility on that. And they're both in person and virtual. And I give a talk on the science, and a medium gives readings. And you can find all of this on my website at wtfjusthappened.net. And I'm also very active on Instagram and TikTok. So you can link to those through my website.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Liz. I've loved listening to all your scientific information and your paranormal experiences.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always so much fun to share my stories and get to learn a bit about your story too.
I can't help but share. It's just in my nature to I don't know, I think it helps make it relatable for people. So I just tell stories all the time. I can't help myself. Thank you, Liz.
I think
thank you so much.
The more we hear, the better. The more of these stories we hear, the better it is. So thank you too.